what a wonderful world.
Welcome to See and Learn on Saba 2013. This year's See and Learn events kicked off with an opening night at the new Breadline Plaza in Windward Side, where the large crowd was entertained by the Saba Danza cultural group and magician Bob Guile.
But we actually got the smoke. Look at the smoke now. This is it. It's now traveling into the past. Daniel, your 20 is now, I'd say, a good 15 days in the past.
Seabirds expert Dr. Adrian Del Nevo then gave the opening night presentation on the locally relevant topic of tropic birds. Later on in the week, Adrian also led a field trip along the Spring Bay Trail.
So the intention of today is to hopefully capture some birds and let you see these really very beautiful birds in the hand. So we need to stay away from the nets, and we need to keep as quiet as we can, because otherwise it's going to scare the birds away and they'll move and feed somewhere else. So the quieter we can be, we increase the chance of bird movement, go back and forth. Well, we brought a group of participants from See and Learn, and we brought them on to the Spring Bay level area, which is an area of dry forest woodland. And the aim was to, first of all, show birds in the hand or close to, and talk about the species composition and the abundance of those birds here in this particular habitat. It may be different in other areas, but we're just looking at one this afternoon. And to show them birds close in hand, we've used some very fine nets, which the birds can't see. And as they're going, birds are flying across the trail, we capture them in the nets, and they're very secure and safe, and they're not injured, and we take them out and we show them to the people. So that's the pearly-eyed thrasher, very common around the houses. One of the most vocal birds on the island. Well, tropic birds are one of the seabird species here on Saba, but a very important one. Tropic birds on Saba probably represent the largest percentage of that species in anywhere in the Caribbean. And in fact, Saba has anywhere up to about 15% of the world population of that species. So what goes on here is very important for tropic birds. And we found out quite recently that although there are a large number of individuals, unfortunately, they're not producing many young, and that's a problem. And so our studies have been to try and understand what might be affecting the very poor nesting success. And we know that they're not feeding the chicks as much fish as we perhaps would have expected. And we've also seen lots of predators around their nest burrows. They nest under boulders or in the cliffside. And we've put some cameras out, and we've discovered that there are a number of predators that are in the area. We don't know exactly how much those predators are affecting the tropic birds, but it's likely that they may have a serious impact. And those predators include cats, rats, and also lizards, land crabs, and there are also lots of goats around.
Where are the tropic birds located on this island?
Well, they're a seabird, and so naturally they're around the coast, and they're in 4 main areas. One area is at the sulfur mine by Pirate Cliffs. Another area is by Torrens Point. A third area is what we call the tent area of Saba, just near to south of Fort Bay. And another area is Old Booby Hill, and that's the largest nesting colony of tropic birds on the island. And the fifth main area is what we call the Great Level, which is very near to the island dump.
Do you think the burning of the garbage benefits the tropic bird population on the island?
I think probably the answer to that is it's a little too early to tell. But if they are getting rid of the rubbish, the waste, more quickly, more efficiently, then intuitively you would expect that to reduce the amount of food that might be available to rats. And if the rat population does not have so much food, they can't produce young quite so easily. And if that's the case and the rats are affected, then equally that may affect the cat population that are looking for them and other things as well. So I think it's too early to say. I'm optimistic that it could have a positive effect, but part of our ongoing studies at looking at the cats and the birds together is to try and see if, or to monitor if there are any positive effects, which we hope there will be.
Marine physiologist Mary Hagedorn works with cutting-edge techniques for reef conservation. During her See and Learn visit, she took part in a wide range of activities. See and Learn intern Imke van Gerwen caught up with her to talk about her work.
It's been a pleasure to be here on Saba as the guest of See and Learn Foundation, and I've had the pleasure of working with the Girls Snorkel group, and we worked on the idea of reef as home to all the organisms, or many of the organisms in the ocean, and they did a beautiful art project, and that was a lot of fun. And then I had a very nice talk in Brigadoon Restaurant, which was fabulous, and then I had the pleasure of working with 12 or so divers on the windward side of the island yesterday, and we looked at some of the coral reefs and just had a really great afternoon.
You said you've been freezing the reef. Tell me more about that.
It's kind of a quick way to talk about my work, and the idea really is that coral reefs around the world are dying, and it's because of global causes and local causes, and the global causes are our overuse of fossil fuels, increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, which warms, think of it as a blanket around the earth. So it warms the earth, but it also warms the water. And coral are very sensitive. They've lived for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years in a certain temperature range. And if you boost them too much, just like if we, in our cities, when they get too hot, young people and older people tend to not do well. It's the same with coral. If they get too hot for too long, then they start to stress and they can die. And I think you've had an example of that in 2005 or thereabouts, Caribbean-wide. You had a massive die-off of coral here, and more than likely due to the global causes of, the water being too warm. But then, as I said, you have local causes, which can be sediment or pollution, overfishing, or damaging fishing practices. There's a number of local causes, so what I'm doing, because this is happening around the world, is I'm using human fertility techniques such as freezing sperm and freezing stem cells, and I'm making a worldwide bank for coral. And there are 2 coral here in the Caribbean that are what we would call reef-building coral, and you can think of them as like the acropods down in your bay or your harbor that protect the harbor, those sort of tiddlywinks, cement structures. And that's what the coral can do for your island, is they protect our islands and our homes. And the 2 species that do that around the Caribbean are the staghorn coral and the elkhorn coral. And those are the ones that are most affected Caribbean-wide, and we are losing them in large numbers, and they aren't really acting as an ecosystem any longer. We see patches of them, and many of those patches are no longer breeding. And so it's really disturbing to see what's happening Caribbean-wide to those groups. And so I have some of those groups from Puerto Rico and Belize already in a bank. And I, of course, need more in terms of genetic diversity and the numbers that I'd like to put into the bank. But we have other coral that are in banks from Australia and also from Hawaii. And we're hoping to train more people and expand our banks.
So how many people are doing this research?
Right now, I work at the Smithsonian, and my laboratory is based in Hawaii at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, which is part of the University of Hawaii. And we're the only group right now that's doing that. We're hoping to expand that and to train more people. We will be training people in Australia and the Middle East over this next year. And we'd hope to sort of get an army of people who are doing similar kinds of things that we can say, go out and do this. Now, I also need to make it clear that we're not just doing the coral because, as I mentioned earlier, coral is the home, right? It's a reef and it provides homes for fish and many other organisms. So we are freezing the stem cells from fish, and we are freezing the embryos of sea urchins. We are freezing the algae that live inside the coral, and we are also trying to freeze the calcareous algae, which are really important in our ecosystem. It's that pink stuff that looks like the Cat in the Hat came down and painted on the rocks or the sand. And it is an algae, but it's a very thin algae, but it tells the coral where to settle. So it's really important in terms of giving off chemical cues to the reef. So we're actually trying to do a wide variety of organisms, not just coral.
So you've done some diving on Ceiba now. What are your impressions on the coral reefs around the island?
It's clear to me from the very minimal amount of diving that I've done that your fish and your coral are suffering. It's clear that they've suffered perhaps from that 2005 event. For example, we went over to the windward side yesterday and there were, say, 20 to 40 large elkhorn coral in a very healthy, say, pre-2000 population. You would see those elkhorn coral shoulder to shoulder. They would be forming a fence around your island, and the staghorn coral would be up against them, providing them protection against the waves, and it would just be a thicket, very difficult to get through. And unfortunately, that no longer exists, at least in that one spot that I saw. So I would say that, Ceiba has done a terrific job in terms of mitigating its local causes or threats to the reefs, but it is suffering from the global causes, which are very difficult to deal with. And that's why we're having this bank, because it's very difficult to deal with global issues unless all of us get together and decide we're going to use alternate energy and try not to use so much fossil fuels.
You're making this genetic bank to preserve the coral reefs in the future. Why do we have to worry now?
Number one, people ask, won't the conditions be different in the 50 years from now or 100 years from now? We don't know the answer to that. We could wake up and say, oh, we have to change things immediately and stop using so much fossil fuel. And it's difficult to know how long it would take the oceans to recover to, say, our pre-industrial conditions. But the bank is the material in the bank is good for hundreds of years, thousands even. And so think of it as Sleeping Beauty, if you will. It's frozen but alive, and it's a perfect library of the genetic material of the genome. So it's a wonderful library, and think of it as a museum. People collected things for the museums here. We're sitting here at the museum at Ceiba, and they never expected that they would use it. So I imagine that this material might get used hundreds of years in the future when the oceans are more like they were, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But they also could be used, to help diversify our populations. We will be using some of the bank in Australia this year, and we will be creating creating large populations from this frozen material. And the idea is to really create a blueprint for the future, because not everybody's going to know 50 years from now or 100 years from now exactly how to grout the coral. I think some of that information may have gotten lost. But if we can create this blueprint, then we can go forward. But I think the most important issue about this is it's an insurance policy. And just because you have insurance on your car, you wouldn't run it into the wall. You value your car, you value your health, you value the wall. And that's what we'd like to engender, not only in our current population, but in our children, that they have an intrinsic love and place a value on our ecosystems and our coral reefs, and that they would want to save them regardless of the fact that there's a frozen backup or a frozen insurance population. It's important that we care for our ecosystems and our coral reefs.
Visiting us from Barbados was alternative energy expert David Ince. After touring the island to look at potential sources of energy on Saba, David met up with See and Learn intern Leslie Revel to sum up his findings.
Well, Saba is just a great place for renewable energy in general. It has a multiple of opportunities. There is solar, wind, geothermal straight off the bat that we can look at, and even perhaps some options for wave power. So Saba is really ready to take off. It's already an eco country. You can see that all around us is green, and therefore it's ripe for green energy. And I think all it needs is for the people to be really committed to it, which it seems that that's happening, especially the younger ones that we are seeing. And once we get that started, I think certainly solar, wind, and geothermal are sources that can be exploited here and very beneficially for the island.
What are some steps that we can take for renewable energy?
Part of it is education, and thankfully that is being done. People are becoming more aware of what's possible. I think in the world and in the Caribbean, we are seeing some things happening, and if people can see, other countries are doing it, Saba can follow. In the Dutch Caribbean, for example, we have Curaçao and Bonaire that have been moving ahead in wind and to some extent solar. They'll have that Dutch connection. As the Saba, that's an opportunity to go as far as they've gone, or maybe even further, because Saba is even a smaller country, and a smaller island, and if you can just get more people in the island on it, then it might be easier to flow through the system, because the communication is so good between people here. Everybody knows everybody, and if you are doing a project, I could see a lot of success in terms of that synergy and people working together. So I think that's a big way to go. The government and the policies obviously also have to push that ahead so that the financing will come, because people are going to do it only if they feel that the economics is good and that the environmental benefits are worth keeping. So that's what needs to be done. I think that with Saba as an eco island, and certainly the unspoiled queen, as they call it, I think that putting green energy into that mix just makes it even more attractive as an environmental, ecological destination.
From the state of Florida, See and Learn brought in Brent Winter, a fishery scientist who has a special interest in sharks and rays. During his stay on Saba, he focused on sharing his knowledge with the younger generation.
Very smart, very smart. And that's a science term for the group of fish that includes the sharks. Educating the kids is critical for the future of the resources and stuff, for them to better understand what sharks and rays are, what role they play in the ecosystem, in the oceans, in Saba and elsewhere. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Kids watching Shark Week and bring up these points of Megalodon still alive and all this stuff, and misinformation about how sharks attack or the stingrays are aggressive, that type of thing. And you get in front of kids and you give them the right information, and they actually get hands-on experience to touch a shark and touch a ray, and they understand where the spine's at and how the ray uses it, why he uses it. They understand the differences in sharks and that type of thing. So it makes them more aware of them and makes them want to appreciate and protect their habitat and the different species, which we need.
We noticed you brought a special box down from the States. What was in the box?
It was a bit of a challenge. At the research lab I work at, we have a museum, a collection of tens of thousands of species, including sharks and rays. And we have a special collection that I've collected over the past 20 years of specimens we use for education. So it's something we do in America as well. We have a thing called the Great American Teach-In, and I go out into the schools and the kids handle them. And the cool thing is they can see a shark and a ray right next to each other. And even though they're in the same class of fish, they're really kind of different. They can look at similarities between the two. So I was fortunately able to ship some of the specimens to Saba, so the kids here could experience the same things that we do in America and learn the differences and similarities between sharks and rays.
We're also having problems like the rest of the Caribbean with lionfish. Is feeding lionfish to sharks a viable option?
The lionfish invasion, if you will, throughout the Caribbean and eastern South Atlantic, and even the Gulf of Mexico, where I'm at, has been one of the largest infestations in marine environment in the world, for sure. And although some of the local approaches, even in the Florida Keys, has been these lionfish rodeos where they'll spare them and then take them back and cook them. In my opinion, feeding them to live fish, whether it's Goliath grouper, other species of grouper, or sharks, is not good for those species, and it's definitely not good for the divers. It's been proven that sharks can have learned behavior. On shark feeding sites, they hear the boat coming, or they see the spear guns, and that will, could mean more interactions between sharks. It could be dangerous. So I think that may happen naturally, and that's the best approach, to let that type of predator-prey relationship develop naturally, and we pray that it does happen that way because of the aggressive nature of lionfish.
For most people, the thought of scorpions and spiders will send chills down the spine, but for arachnid expert Lauren Esposito, it's all in the day's work. Her See and Learn mission was to research the diversity of the local population of spiders and scorpions, but also to desensitize the public, young and old, about these much misunderstood species.
We took the kids out looking for spiders, and we taught them a few ways to search for spiders, and then turned them loose on the Sulphur Mine Trail, and they ran around and brought back tons of spiders for us. So I think it's really important to get the students out on a field project, get them out of the classroom and doing real science. I also think that it's a nice opportunity to have the kids participate in real science, because this is a part of a biodiversity project studying arachnids in the Caribbean. All of these specimens are actually going to eventually end up at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And 50 years from now, they could take their grandchildren to the Smithsonian and show them the spiders that they collected during the biodiversity research project on Ceiba.
While you're out there, you found something special, I heard.
Yeah, so while the students were running around, I was just sort of slowly walking, turning over some stones, and I found 2 spiders that I think are probably 2 species that are new to science, new species, new world records. Both of them are really tiny spiders, but one of them is a little purple one with long legs. That's most certainly a new species. I know for sure, 100%, there's never been any known from Ceiba, and so these spiders, they tend to be a species that's unique to each environment, so it's most certainly a new species. The other one is a tiny little orange and black spider called a Goblin Spider, and I'm not 100% sure about that one. It's really hard to tell. Their characteristics that we use are so tiny that we'll really have to get a good microscope in order to certify that it's a new species, but we know for sure we have at least one.
This is not your first visit here at Ceiba. You were here earlier on in the year?
I've been here a couple of times, and the most recent was in February. I came on a yacht, and we arrived as part of a big biodiversity survey. So we were actually traveling by yacht, island to island, from St. Martin all the way to Grenada. And so we came and we spent several wonderful days, I should add, on the island, doing probably the first survey of arachnids by arachnologists ever done on Ceiba in the history of the island.
And in this one up here, there's 2 other theridiids that are kleptoparasites. Again, they're parasitizing the web, and there's one red one right here, and down here sort of a metallic one.
One of the things about Ceiba is that it has more biodiversity than the surrounding islands, which makes it sort of like a mega biodiversity island in what's already a biodiversity hotspot. So the Caribbean is recognized as a biodiversity hotspot. It has more species of organisms per sort of square kilometer than the surrounding continents. And that's because there's organisms invading from North America, organisms invading from South America, things coming from Central America, in some cases things floating over all the way from Africa. So it's built up all this biodiversity that really is significantly higher than the surrounding continental areas. And in the case of Ceiba, it actually has more biodiversity than the surrounding islands that are already incredibly diverse. And that's because we have this tall mountain in the middle, which gives us tons of habitats that aren't necessarily available on St. Martin, which is much lower, or even Statia, which is also a bit lower. in elevation, and so we just sort of have this pump where there's like tons of biodiversity, tons of species of arachnids that are coming and landing on Ceiba and really contributing to the overall uniqueness of the island.
Thank you for watching this first report on See and Learn on Ceiba 2013. We still have an exciting program lined up for the rest of October. We'll be back for another report at the end of the month. Remember, it's fun, it's free, and it's for everyone.
I think to myself, what a wonderful